It's also an opportunity. And yes, they're drifting, but what a wonderful opportunity that is for the church to rebuild relationships with young people and be the source of hope and strength and peace and joy that I think Jesus offers to all generations, but especially young people.
Hey, thanks for checking out this video from our network. The Canadian Church Leaders Network exists to seed a hopeful future for the church in Canada. We want to come alongside pastors in Canada to serve, equip, and resource them as they in turn do the same for their communities. If you're looking to be further resourced or to connect with more church leaders across our nation who are seeking to learn and lead together, we encourage you to find us on Instagram by searching CCLN or just hit subscribe below. Thanks again for watching this video. We hope it's helpful and encouraging for you.
Well, hey, Kara, it is so good to be with you today. Thanks for making time to hang out with us.
Oh, my pleasure, Jason. I've been looking forward to this.
Now, Kara, you are an incredible writer and educator and researcher and minister. Tell us a little bit, like for those that don't know you as well, give us a window into maybe some of the projects and groups you're working with right now that's most exciting you.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I'm a faculty member at Fuller Seminary, but really my main job is, our jobs, I should say, I'm the executive director of the Fuller Youth Institute, which is a research center focused on young people's faith formation. And then I'm also the chief of leadership formation at Fuller Seminary. So I oversee actually a number of centers that are all geared toward serving hands-on leaders in very practical ways. And so our method is we take research and turn it into resources that are spread through relationships. So I think I've always been passionate about research and resources. You know, when you ask about a project that I'm particularly passionate about right now, it's that third R, that relationships, that is very life-giving to me. How can we bring together the body of Christ, like Jesus prayed in John 17, to see more leaders equipped and more young people impacted? So that's a big part of what I'm investing in these days.
Oh, I love it. And I've been on an interesting journey. Like a lot of people listening, they might have had a season in youth ministry or in children's ministry, and then they, graduate on or whatever. And I don't want to slam the person. Like I've heard some people say, if you're not called to it for life, no, listen, we're all got to make our way through the pathway in churches ministries. But what's interesting with my journey is I feel more passionate about children and youth ministry than I ever did when my job title said children or youth on it. And so when I meet someone like you, Kara, who's like dedicated your life to championing the cause of the next generation, I find myself just like, first of all, thank you so much. I just feel like, well, maybe let me turn it into a question. What's at stake here? Because we're going to talk about, I'm just going to lay the thesis out. I think that every senior pastor needs to make children and youth work one of their primary problems. Yeah. But I think when someone like you dedicates your life, and we're working really hard to build resources to reach the next generation, educate, what's at stake? Like, why is this so important today to be a conversation that we have? Yeah.
Well, honestly, when you ask the question, Jason, what's at stake, the word that pops into my mind is everything. I think everything is at stake because our young people are the church of today and they're the church of tomorrow. And so if we're not prioritizing them, if we're not, as you said, thinking about how do we respond to the drift of young people from the church and the faith, which I know you and I, it's certainly a need or a problem. It's also an opportunity. And I know you and I have both been influenced by the Great Opportunity Report that particularly looked at young people in the US. And yes, they're drifting, but what a wonderful opportunity that is for the church to rebuild relationships with young people and be the source of hope and strength and peace and joy that I think Jesus offers to all generations, but especially young people. So I would say everything's at stake. And what's amazing about our research, like I was just quoting from our Growing Young research today, that we started because we wanted to study how churches are changing young people, and we certainly did that. But along the way, we also saw how young people are changing churches. So, I can't, I'm biased here, but I can't think of a better way to reinvigorate a church than to have its young people be passionate in their following of Jesus. So I think everything is at stake, not just for young people, but really for all of us.
And I know that some of the numbers would be different from the U.S. to Canada.
Yeah.
And so, but don't hesitate to cite U.S. research on this or generally, because the trends are the same. What are some of the trends and currents? And so, for example, some of the currents and trends, over the last decade have been decreased engagement in the church among millennials and Gen Z.
Yeah.
There's also, like, on the clergy level, less and less young clergy.
Yeah.
What other trends are you seeing that you think are relevant for us to be looking at in terms of plot lines as we look ahead to the state of the church?
Yeah. Well, you've nailed a couple of the really important ones. Here in the U.S., and I do know U.S. data better than I know Canadian data. Here in the U.S., the typical church is aging and or shrinking. 18 to 29-year-olds make up 17% of the population, but they're less than 10% of U.S. churchgoers. So, we have a dwindling of young people, which is causing, it's one of a handful of reasons that churches are getting smaller. I'll also say, when it comes to data, I'm very concerned about what's happening with all generations' mental health, but I'll say especially young people's mental health in the midst of this pandemic. I mean, it was bad before we all went into quarantine, and the distance and the isolation that all generations have experienced, but especially young people. I mean, we're seeing escalating rates of suicides, completed suicides, suicide ideation, et cetera, depression, anxiety. So I'm very concerned about what's happening with young people when it comes to mental health also.
I feel like the gap between, and I think I was a teenager, you were a teenager. We always felt like our parents didn't understand us. Like that's always been the case. And there always have felt like a gap, like, Mom, you don't get it. And but I feel like that gap, and I don't know if that's just an anecdotal experience or if that's what the research is showing, but there is a sense by which the disconnect between the average 15-year-old and even the 30 or 40-year-old or 50-year-old in a church, it just seems to be growing. Language, reference points, values. It seems like you're having two separate conversations and missing each other.
Yeah. And I think that this has become a little bit of a theme here, Jason. I think that's a problem and an opportunity. Because yes, while the gap has grown, I think once we've earned trust with young people, that they're open to helping us bridge that gap. So, let me just get super tangible. Dave and I, we're parents of a 20-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 15-year-old. So we are living, young adult and youth ministry in our house. And in the midst of the pandemic, in the US, when George Floyd was murdered, there was this surge of interest in racial justice and racial reconciliation. And young people in many ways were leading in various cities, various towns, various marches, peaceful protests, et cetera. And so there was probably about a month where at most dinner times, one of my first questions for my kids was, what did you see on social media today about race? Wow. Because I wanted to know, and I wanted us to be able to talk about it. And I've done a lot of things wrong as a parent. Like, we could do a whole other podcast. We could do a podcast series on that, Jason. Yeah. But I'll point out, I think the one thing that I did well is ask a question, really being curious. Young people have radar when we have a particular agenda that we're pursuing. And my kids and other teenagers will kind of shut me down if they think I'm pursuing an agenda, and maybe rightly so. But if I'm coming in a posture of curiosity, tell me more, how can I learn from you? And so, what I would say to any pastor is when you're starting to feel like there's a gap, well, blatantly ask young people to help you cross that gap. Ask 3 young people in your church, hey, could we have coffee once a month and I can just ask you questions and you can show me what's going on in social media, or show me your favorite 5 images on your phone, because I would just love to understand that better.
Yeah.
Let's let young people be experts in helping us bridge the gap as we've built trust with them to do so.
I kind of want to slow down some of what you said there, because I think it was really profound. There's something about, like, even you just said, like, we were having dinner together and I asked a question. I mean, those are like, that is a decision. That doesn't happen on accident in the average home. And then that posture of curiosity, because it is, I'm sure, tempting to just commentate so much on everything that they never want to answer that question. Yeah. Like, talk to me a little bit more about actually, like, the intentionality behind creating that space, inviting them to the table, and then taking a curiosity where they actually want to tell you what they saw.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jason. That was, I'm glad you slowed this conversation down a bit. So, every family needs to figure out when they best connect with their young people. And every mentor needs to figure out when he or she best connects with their young people. What's interesting is there have been seasons before the pandemic when I would actually connect best with our teenagers when we were driving places. Because, a lot of what I did was I was their personal Uber, helping them get from soccer practice to worship practice to small group to a homework session, etc. And I loved that time in the car. The pandemic strikes, and I would say we were a family who we would probably have dinner together 2 to 3 times a week, honestly, in a typical week. In a really busy week, maybe even less than that. So Dave and I, we were connecting with our kids in the car. We were connecting when we tucked them in. We were looking for other windows. And so that's what I just have said to parents all along is meals are great for some families sometimes, but what's important is the relationship wherever you're building it. The pandemic comes and all of a sudden we're not driving many places in our car. I mean, my minivan sat in our driveway 4 or 5 days in a row that I wouldn't drive it. Meals, all of a sudden, this very busy, sometimes overly busy family that we were, the pandemic was the brake pedal that in many ways I think we needed. And we did start having meals more together, and most nights we had a meal together, and sometimes it would be 20 minutes, other times it would be like 45 minutes of just processing the day. Again, I would often kind of have a curiosity question I wanted to ask them about technology, about something I had read about young people. One of the things that I've talked about with my kids multiple times is it's been said that you become the average of the 5 people with whom you spend the most time. But if you look at the 5 people that you spend the most time with, you become basically the sum total of them. Do you think that's true? And just to have a conversation like that. So we did. When the pandemic hit, dinners all of a sudden became really the best time for us to connect with our kids. And so, and sometimes, I'm a very structured, intentional person. So I have to tell myself, like, Kara, don't come into dinner with a question. Like, let's just see where the conversation goes. And so I more need to make things more organic, shall we say. Whereas there are others who maybe need to turn that dial and be a little bit more structured. So know where you tend to lean, and then try to compensate to have the right rhythms for your family.
I want to come back to this idea of parents and engaging their children and their teenagers. So I'll just put a pin on it.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that, though, in the context of the work that a local church can do holistically to serve and support the discipleship of children and youth.
Yeah.
And so just begin, what is holistic, like, what does it look like for a senior pastor to do more than hire a youth pastor, a children's pastor to pursue? And I think about the work you guys did in Growing Young, which was a really impactful book for me, and the research that you guys did that really looked at churches that were I think, succeeding in this area. I think
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
profile 250 churches that are having some measure of consistent success engaging the next generation.
Yep.
And the things that were mentioned were not like built a youth center. It was way more holistic than that. So just give us a little window into what holistic youth ministry and children's ministry looks like in a local community.
Yeah, great question. So we did study 250 churches that are growing young, and we did deep dive. And when we, over 10,000 pages of data that we collected, and we were able to identify 6 core commitments that these churches exemplified when it came to loving and attracting young people. And it started with the kind of leader that they developed. And the good news for me, Jason, I'm a little bit older than you. The good news for me is that it's not about being a young or a cool leader. It's about being what we call a keychain leader, a leader who looked for ways to hand the keys of power, access, and authority to young people. And so, if you happen to be a young, cool leader like yourself, Jason, well, then awesome.
Stop it, Kara.
Yeah, hey, compared to me, it's all relative, right? So,
it's relative.
But for those who are young and hip, awesome. Just keep being that way. And my teenagers would say, just the way that I said young and hip betrays that I am neither young nor hip. So even my language betrays that. But if that is you, then great, be yourself. But for all of us, how can we hand keys over to young people? How can we build genuine relationship with young people? One senior pastor we interviewed said something so powerful. He said, for young people, warm is the new cool. So it's not about, being hip even throughout your church. It's, are you a warm environment? Another one of the core commitments that we identified was neighboring well, and how much young people want to be invited into sacrifice, into giving for their local and global neighbors. So there is no single lever, to your point about it being holistic. There's no single lever that works with all young people. What we saw churches do was think about their leadership, think about their community, think about their teaching and how they did or didn't talk about Jesus. Think about how they empathize with young people. And it was really making progress in all 6 of these areas that seemed to set these churches apart.
Tell me about the point on empathizing with young
Yeah.
people. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Millennials and now Gen Z have been so maligned by those of us who are older. We have criticized, we have condemned, we have judged. And what we saw growing young churches do is they didn't judge young people, they journeyed with young people. I mentioned earlier, I'm so interested in building relationships with others, and I've been getting to spend time with more Catholic leaders. And Catholics talk about accompaniment, that a lot of mentoring is accompanying somebody else in their journey as you together journey. And that's what we saw growing young churches do. They had adults who were accompanying young people. And sometimes it didn't come easy. I think about this church in Indiana, where they decided to prioritize young people more. And there was one particular senior adult, she was in her late 60s. We'll call her Evelyn. Evelyn felt like, gosh, my church is now prioritizing young people instead of me, and I don't know how to relate to these young people. And so the pastor said, well, I'll tell you what, Evelyn, I'm going to put you on a committee with some young people. And so it was an intergenerational committee for this church of about 200 or 300. And all of a sudden, Evelyn spent time with young people, and they no longer became someone who sits across the worship center. They became someone who sits across the table. And in particular, and actually our new book, Jason, dives into this more, in particular, when we adults empathize with young people's search for identity, belonging, and purpose. Those were the 3 things that we saw growing young churches really focus on, and empathetically journey with young people, and they're figuring out who they are, where they fit, and what difference can they make. And as Evelyn did that, as Evelyn asked questions, listened, shared more about herself, Like she came to not only love young people, but they loved her in return.
Wow.
So, that's good news. We're not just talking about those of us over 30 who gravitate toward young people. We saw these thoughtful churches give all adults a vision for investing in young people that paid off.
Oh, it's so encouraging. There's a study done in Canada in 2011. I think I'm getting that right. We'll cite it in the notes. And it was similar to the research of Sticky Faith. And it was I think a similar trend. Like it was identifying that a high percentage of students, if they followed up 4 or 5 years after graduation from high school, were disconnected from the local church. And then they found, though, what were the consistent factors at play for those who did stay in the life of local church or had meaningful faith expression. I don't know how they quantified it.
Sure.
But the number one determining factor, one way or the other, was the faith modeled in the home by the parents. And that's similar to what was found in Sticky Faith, right?
Yeah.
And there was a haunting line in Sticky Faith. Sorry. There's this haunting line that you said in Sticky Faith. I don't know if you're quoting someone, but I remember circling it. And you said, when it comes correct me how I get it. When it comes to parenting, you get who you are. Did I get the quote right?
Yeah. Yes, it was not me. It was Chris Smith, who did a major study of U.S. young people across a number of faiths, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Mormonism, etc. And his quote was, he said this at a panel at Fuller, and I think it's in one of his books too. When it comes to kids' faith, parents get what they are. So good memory, Jason. You were really super.
It's haunting though.
Oh, totally. It's like encouraging and terrifying at the same time. So, but I just want to, I'm actually speaking at my 12th grade daughters, an event for parents sometime soon. And I'm going to pull on some of our research. And so I've been thinking about this. One of the things I'm going to say is what we saw amazing parents do is not be perfect, not at all, but be quick to apologize. Like, because my kids see me at my worst. And, one of the many ways our research has changed me is giving me a bigger understanding of God's grace, to be sure, and make me more committed to sharing that and repenting and asking forgiveness from our kids. And this interview that I did, we were in a season where we were interviewing amazing parents, and this was a parent he had 2 college students and a high school age student. And I called him for the interview, and he said, I just don't think you should interview me right now. I've had to apologize to all 3 of my daughters in the last 48 hours. And we had seen this theme in our research. And so I actually said, well, that's exactly why we want to talk to you, is because what we're seeing is, parents, yes, they absolutely model the faith. And when they don't, they apologize to their kids. They let kids in on how their own relationship with Jesus has highs and lows. So yes, our example is really important. And one of the things we exemplify is the way that we apologize and we confess when we don't get it right.
So for a lead pastor who wants to think about the culture of their church, think about empowering their youth team for youth programming, if that's the case, but then also serve and support parents, what kind of advice can you give a pastor if he's saying, hey, I want to serve and support parents in their effort of discipleship in the home, practically, or how do we inspire that? How do we serve that as pastors?
Well, probably my first piece of advice is, if for whatever age group that you are shepherding, if you haven't parented that age group, then create a small team of parents who you can call on at any time. Because if you haven't parented the age group you're shepherding, you can't fully get what it's like to be a parent of that age group, all the highs and the lows. And so our high school pastor does this. He has 2 wonderful daughters. The oldest is probably 5 or 6. And so me and a handful of others, we are his go-to people. And he texts us with questions. He gathers us sometime for feedback. He's very thoughtful about learning from parents and making sure that he understands what parents are going through. And so that's the first thing I would say is if you haven't parented,
So helpful.
then create your own little casual or structured group of parents that can be your sounding board.
But I do think parents do like it when the youth pastor who has no kids does give them advice, don't they?
Not so much. Not so much. You know,
I think I had more advice for parents before I had kids than I did before. I had a lot of advice for parents before I had kids.
Totally. You knew so much about parenting before you had kids.
It was so much easier.
Yeah. And, you know, there's just so much that you don't see as a pastor. Like, and I had no idea until I parented teenagers, all that I didn't see when I was a youth pastor. And, you know, our 3 kids have all been very connected to our student ministry, involved in student leadership, involved in worship leadership, involved in a small group, had a mentor, etc. And yet these great mentors who I appreciate so much, they see maybe 20% of what my kids are going through, honestly. They hear about it 4 days later. They don't see it in real time necessarily. Dave and I are the ones who, you know, see our son when his girlfriend is broken up with him, you know, in front of our house at our front door. We're the ones who journey with our daughters when they're feeling lonely or are struggling with friends. And so again, I love these amazing mentors. I'm so grateful for them. And there's just so much that we as mentors, pastors don't see. The second thing I would say for pastors, whatever age group you're working with, is do whatever small steps you can take to equip parents. And the more practical, the better. Like what I want as a parent is I want a couple questions that I can talk about with my kids that relate to their small group, relate to, you know, whatever message it was, relate to Sunday morning, Sunday school. I just want a couple handholds from you on what I can ask about, what I might be able to share. And so, you know, I love it when churches, and our church has done well with this, gives me just those few questions that I can talk about with my kids, whether it's, you know, in the minivan ride as we're driving home, or whether it's over a meal, or as I'm tucking them in, whatever it might be. Like, I love those practical handholds. So one of the best gifts you can give a parent is a few questions to know how they can discuss and reinforce and partner with you better in what you're trying to teach the church.
That's so helpful. And what kind of support, like, I mean, literally like support, like emotional, spiritual support, can we give parents? Like, you know, like, what does it mean for us to just help parents know? Like, as a minister, I, before a sermon, open up my hands and ask the Holy Spirit to animate what I'm about to do. There was a time in my life where older people came around me and prayed for me for the task of being a pastor. I feel like I want to do that for every parent. Like, you are the chief disciple maker in these precious little ones' lives, and you need the help of the Holy Spirit and a community and support, but we don't go to school for it.
Right.
We don't, you know, and so like, and then just the spiritual support, like as a pastor, I know how I'm supported by mentors. Like, how can we as a church support parents in their task of parenting?
Yeah. I had a great conversation with Reggie Joyner at Orange about this. Orange is a wonderful ministry that's all about how do we bring church and family together. And I think in many ways we need to think about how we're doing youth ministry to parents, or maybe better said, parent ministry to parents. Just like we're thinking about with young people, how do we create the warmth and the support that parents need? And so, for instance, how do we connect parents with each other? I see thoughtful ministries like create a book club, often short, not months of a commitment, like we're going to read a book together for 3 weeks. Or take advantage of when parents know they need help. Parents know they need help when their kid's going to a new school, when their kid is entering a new school level. So like kindergarten, like middle school, like high school, like college. And so, you know, I've seen a lot of creative churches say, okay, let's bring parents together now as their kids are, say, going to college or the military, the workforce, et cetera. And let's create some kind of parent support for 2 or 3 weeks just to get the ball rolling and seeing what God does. So I would say connecting parents with other parents, connecting parents with mentors. I know in your church, pastors, I know in your church, there are parents who you respect and younger parents respect. Could you create, an availability, or here's a parent advice council, or here are 3 parents, a single mom, a blended family, and an intact family, and they're all here to answer your questions as you need. So, and the mentoring. And then the last thing I will say is, leaders make my day when they text me something great about my kid. Actually, you make my week. You make my week when you text me something great about my kid. Just like you would want to text a teenager if you saw, to affirm them, like affirm a parent in something you see in their kid. You're like, our high school pastor recently reached out to me and said, your daughter did such a good job welcoming a new girl this morning to church. And she was just so hospitable, connected her with other girls. I was like, yes. I mean, that was like the high of my week, is hearing that about my daughter. And so,
wow.
So yeah, take 60 seconds right now and send a couple texts to parents, letting them know what you appreciate about their kid, and you will make a parent's week. So
I don't know if I just stole this from you. I didn't. I read something. I don't know if this was in Sticky Faith or something like that, the Youth Leader's Guide. But I just remember when I was a youth pastor, I asked every one of our youth. I told our youth leaders about this, and they started doing it, and it was game changer.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, it is like, and it makes sense as a parent now. Like when the teacher at school said, Hudson was so polite in school today. I'm just like, I just feel like $1 million. There's nothing, but it's such an easy win.
Yeah.
And so then I had to try it too, because we're trying to like stop parents from just dropping off their kids and then bolting. They'd stay in their car.
Yeah.
And so I'd go right out to their car and have the awkward conversation. And it was always so awkward. And we started like talking about the awkward conversation with parents in the car window.
Nice.
But the easiest way in was always, hey, like, we love having Kyle. Like, it really stands out to us just how much he like draws other people in, or he's so creative, and anything. Yeah. And it was game changer. So thank you so much for saying that. And it's worth any youth pastor listening. Pause. Yeah. Just pause. Just stop. This will get your money's worth right now. Like, just go implement that in some way. It really helps.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, and especially a lot of youth pastors are intimidated by parents. And so you build a great bridge when you compliment their kid. So
talk to me about that intimidation, because that's real. Like, I think there's this weird myth that like the parents are not for, like there's this like parents are in the way of good youth ministry. Yeah. But I think we have to switch it to be like, no, parents are the way to good youth ministry. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll tell you, the phone never looked so big than when I was trying to make parent calls, because I just felt so intimidating. And, I remember being like 24 and talking to parents and feeling like, I don't know what to say. I don't understand what they've been through. I don't want them to think I'm calling because their kid's in trouble. And so, my best advice, and what I ended up trying to do myself, is we've already talked about, like, affirm something about their kid, the questions they ask, the way they dive in to whatever it might be. But then the other thing is ask parents how you can pray for them. And then let parents, say a week later to a parent, hey, I am praying for you. How's it going with such and such? So not just ask for the prayer request, but actually pray, and then follow up and find out how it's going. Regardless of whatever gap or intimidation you feel with parents, if you affirm their kids and ask how you can pray, you grow in confidence in approaching them, and they feel more comfortable talking to you about what's really going on in their family.
Oh, that's so helpful. Before we wrap today, I really want to talk about your newest project. I'm really excited about it.
I love how you say project, by the way. Awesome.
Okay, how do I say it? What do you say? What do I say?
I say project, and you say
did I say project?
Yeah, you kind of say project. Yes,
I think I get the same comment. I think I'm in good company because most of our listeners are Canadian. I think with resource, do we say it differently? How do you say resource?
Yeah, resource.
Resource.
Yeah.
Resource. I think when I was down at Fuller, like it was like 2 Decembers ago. I think you made that same comment to me.
I probably did. So
He said, project, say that again.
yeah, exactly. Love it. Just a
Well,
little cross-cultural learning here. Appreciate
I
it.
want to talk about a new resource, a project you're working on.
Yes,
a
the
book.
resourceful project that I
Yeah.
finished. So I already
I love
mentioned that in our Growing Young research, we saw these 3 areas that young people are wrestling with: identity, who am I; belonging, where do I fit; and purpose, what difference do I make? And a number of us at Fuller started really reflecting on those questions and started using them as glasses through which to view young people. This is game changing for my own parenting. Whenever one of my teenagers would do something that I just couldn't quite understand, if I stopped and said, how are they searching for identity or belonging or purpose? Then it made sense. Like, well, of course she's asking this question because she's so hungry for belonging. Or of course they're acting like this because they're trying to figure out their identity. And so we did another deep dive with 27 very diverse young people. We on purpose, only 7 of the 27 were white kids. The other 20 were kids of color. And we did 6 hours of interviews with each of those kids to really understand their current answers when it comes to identity, belonging, and purpose. What are they currently using to understand themselves, to feel like they belong, and to feel like they make a difference? And then, and here's the key, Jason, what is Jesus's best answer to those questions? And how do we create a bridge in our churches, in our ministries, and in our families from how young people are currently answering these identity, belonging, and purpose questions to Jesus's best answer? So we have a book, came out in August, and it's been so encouraging to see how people are responding to this framework and helping them understand. And the subtitle of the book is about having better connections and conversations. And that's really what we want. We want relationships to flow more easily and conversations to flow more easily.
The project is called 3 Big Questions That Change Every Teenager. And I recommend all of your books, and I've bought, like, for example, Sticky Faith. I bought copies for all the parents in our youth ministry.
Oh, awesome.
We're doing a parent info and resource night with our own church in the next couple of weeks, and I'll be commending these resources to them. So I'm just so thankful for your work, Kara, and excited to read this, for people to be exposed to it. I think it's really, really helpful. I'd love for you to just give us like a window into a little bit. I know you can't like talk about all of it, but like when you talk about Jesus's response, I'd like just to hear you flesh it out.
Yeah.
Like how does Jesus respond to those questions of identity that teenagers are wrestling with?
I'll just focus on identity, just to go deep in one. What we saw in young people's current answers is they often feel inadequate. They don't feel like they measure up. They're not smart enough. They're not popular enough. They're not pretty enough. They're not Black enough for Black teenagers, or Latino enough, as especially kids of color are navigating multiple worlds. And so, Jesus's best identity answer is that I'm more than enough because of Jesus. Jesus makes me more than enough. And, I at my age, I'm still learning to lean into that Jesus makes me more than enough of a mom, more than enough of a leader. And young people, I so want young people to know that. I was asked earlier today in another conversation, like, what do you want young people to know about their faith? Like, if you could wave a wand and change young people's faith. And my answer, because this is something I talk about with my own kids a lot, is I want them to know that only Jesus satisfies. Only Jesus satisfies. That we look for all sorts of things for our identity, belonging, and purpose. And only Jesus's answer ultimately last and satisfy and give us the peace and the hope and the joy and the stability that we want and need. And so, for identity specifically, it's I'm more than enough because of Jesus. And again, we have similar answers for belonging and purpose. And folks can get a sneak peek of the book if you go to 3bigquestionsbook.com. That's the number 3, 3bigquestionsbook.com. We have a free chapter. There's excerpts, so you can dive in and start to understand more about identity, belonging, and purpose.
Oh, I'm so thankful to hear that and excited. I love it. That answer really does impact me, that totally. Nothing else satisfies but Jesus.
Totally. I mean, and what's interesting, Jason, I know we're out of time, but we have a hypothesis that each one of us has a different question, identity, belonging, or purpose, that is kind of the first among others in terms of our own growth, our own formation, our own struggles. And for me, it is identity. Like I and really knowing that I'm enough. My co-author in the book, Brad Griffin, who you've also met, for him, it's belonging. For my husband, it's purpose. So, we have this different kind of front door to our own growth. But, just camping out on identity a little bit for me, I often struggle by feeling like I'm not a good enough mom. And especially when I study all these amazing parents, it's easy to compare the worst of what I know about myself with the best of what I've studied in other people. And, when I feel insecure about myself as a mom, one of my prayer rituals is to just remind myself, Jesus, you make me more than enough. Jesus, you make me more than enough. And so, that's something I pray for myself regularly, because I'm learning to experience Jesus' full answer for myself too. So.
Well, I'm so thankful for our time together today.
Yeah.
Thanks for giving so much time and for the work you're doing. We're all benefiting from it. So thank you so much.
Before you go, we want to let you know about a few things we do here at CCLN that might serve you as you lead yourself and others. Firstly, we regularly release interviews with incredible church leaders from across Canada and the world on our podcast called the Canadian Church Leaders Podcast. So we encourage you to check that out wherever you listen to your podcasts. Secondly, we send out a monthly newsletter with the best resources, podcasts, books, and articles that we've put together for leadership in the Canadian context. If you want it sent straight to your inbox each month, head to ccln.ca to sign up. Lastly, we run a 2-year program called the Church Leaders Incubator, created for young pastors to strengthen their character and ministry for long-term, effective senior leadership. If you're leading a church in Canada or on a trajectory to do that one day, we would love you to consider applying this year or the next. You can learn more about it on our website. Well, thanks again for checking this out. We love you all and are cheering you on. Bye for now.